Hello and welcome once again to the weekly High with LHD show. This week, along with my co-host L. Subramaniam, better known as Subu, we have with us Lloyd Matthias, who's an angel investor and business strategist. He's a board member and advisor to many companies in the technology and consumer space, and he has held senior leadership positions in Fortune 500 companies across India and the Asia Pacific. He was the marketing head of HP's PC business for the Asia Pacific region till end 2018. He was also president and CMO of Tata Docomo, country sales director of Motorola India, and executive VP and category director for PepsiCo South Asia in his previous roles. Other than that, Lloyd has also been the chairman of MRUC, the publishers of the Indian Leadership Survey. So you know the kind of range that or range of topics that Lloyd can actually speak on, which is why we have him on this show. But before we pick Lloyd's brains on digital transformation, the tech startup ecosystem, his role as an investor and advisor, keeping with the format of this show, we have selected three tech developments this week that we would like to highlight. This week has been quite eventful. Also, we also had the Amazon Geo, that saga continuing, but because of time limits, we'll focus on just three things. The first, of course, the tech development that we would like to speak about is I would like to put it as who let the dog out. Of course, we're not talking about dogs out. We're talking about Dogecoin, Elon Musk kind of support for cryptocurrencies. Then the second is on February 9th, we were celebrating Safer Internet Day. The theme was, of course, together for a better internet. India is also toying with the idea of setting up its own internet. We'll speak a little on that under the Atmanirbhar kind of campaign. And of course, I don't think we can conclude this session without talking about the Twitter India government span. We will be broadening the scope to include all social media sites because why just single out Twitter? It has to be other like Facebook, Google, etc. So, without much ado, let's get to the meat of the events. A lot is happening on Dogecoin. Of course, I think in that entire talk it started, I think, with a tweet by Elon Musk, and the stock prices also. So just as we were talking about the rapid rise of Bitcoin, okay, we had a dog being introduced, and everybody started Googling for Shiba Inu. I don't think many people knew about this Japanese dog. Uh, what are your thoughts on Dogecoin and the whole Bitcoin controversy, especially in the light of India government thinking about banning cryptocurrencies?
I thank you for having me on, Leslie, and great to reconnect, Subbu and Neeraj. Thank you so much. I think interesting development by any standard. Clearly, like you said, it kind of got flagged off when Elon Musk, kind of tweeted about it, about picking up some Dogecoin for his son. But I think the other trigger was the fact that Elon Musk, as the head of Tesla, kind of announced that they're actually buying $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, and more importantly, the fact that they're looking at Bitcoin as a valid currency, so to speak.
Right.
When it comes to booking and owning a Tesla.
Yeah.
So I think that development really spurred the entire momentum. And I really think in a sense it's kind of re-altered perceptions. For a lot of it, it was kind of a little hobby driven and driven by spurts. I think two things this points to. At one level, it's really the power of celebrity. The fact that today you've got people like Elon Musk, and there are a handful of people who can actually steer people's or the world's attention to a subject and kind of bring it center stage, right? Not to connect it, but pretty much like over the last fortnight, some international celebrities kind of tweeted about a
Yeah.
farmer
Yeah.
issue and suddenly brought it center stage. So in a sense, the power of celebrity is, I think, one thing in a sense it proved. The second, I think it's made people rethink the entire cryptocurrency space and Bitcoins in particular in the context of a non-sovereign, safe haven of value, right? Historically, it's always been, obviously a sovereign currency, a dollar, or whatever one trades in. But I think it's suddenly opened up the option that, if there are enough people around the world, enough famous people to start with, believe in a non-sovereign currency, then the Bitcoin might just be doing the job. and therefore the reality of it kind of came into the picture. So I really think it's that part is very critical, and the fact that people with large followers or large fan bases, if a handful of them across the world actually come and anoint something as sacred, then hey, that's going to be sacred. People are going to bow and say, okay, we're going to go forward with it.
Yeah,
So I
but
think that part has been very powerful.
governments don't seem to be buying the story.
For now, yes, but like the fact remains is that when enough people, start. I mean, let's say if Tesla accepts it, then maybe a handful of countries will say, okay, this works. I think it's a matter of time before governments will have to reconsider their positions. Right.
Even
So
the
right now,
Indian
the sovereign
government,
is supreme. Yeah.
even the Indian government, because they're thinking clearly about banning and they know all these stories. I mean, that's what I find interesting. I mean, I said here's like you find the Indian government sort of trying to stick to its thing, talking time and again about blockchain. I understand the blockchain. We all understand clearly that blockchain is the underlying technology. But at the
Sure.
same time, I mean, what's wrong with Bitcoin? One starts really figuring out, telling them that okay, fine, you can invest now, you can get out in a phased manner. So what are your thoughts?
I think
So
at a basic level, sorry, if I may, at a basic level, I'm a little uncomfortable because to my mind, let's say any other traded commodity or any other traded aspect, like a stock or a bond or whatever, is dictated by expectations on what that company can deliver in terms of profits in the future, right? So there is something that you're betting on, right? When I can buy a stock, I'm expecting that over time the stock will do well because the company that which I'm buying a little ownership into is capable of creating value in the future, of which I can be part of. In that sense, this is largely speculative, right? Because it's really the belief. But then one could say so is trading in gold or so is trading in any other commodity. It's what people value. But my point there is that most of the others have an intrinsic value to themselves, right? So in a sense, gold has, just ornamental value, or, when I trade in coffee or any metal, there is an intrinsic value. I'm going to use it. I'm going to repurpose it into something. So in that sense, it is speculative, and therefore, I mean, I'm a little very personal.
Fair enough.
Sorry, Subbu, I kind of.
no, not at all. So this essentially reminds me of the musk lemon. I think it's yeah, you know, because it is very scary to imagine that the one entire medium of exchange is going to be predicated on one bloke. Okay, that's a very, very scary thought. So to my mind, every time Musk tweets, okay, that something happens.
Sure.
Okay, and many a time he tweets, about his own company, and the damn share prices go down. Okay, and then everybody blasts him somewhere, and then they come up. Now, so I think in the overall context of Bitcoin, I think we've discussed it in the past. See, there are two things that are important. One is, like Lloyd said, we are used to a sovereign, underwriting of medium of exchanges. Okay, and we are also used to, if the sovereign underwriting is not there, then we are used to a certain intrinsic value. Bitcoin has neither. Okay, which is what makes us uncomfortable. But having said that, I'm reasonably sure that in the next few months and not years, we are going to find sovereigns launching their own versions of crypto. Okay, it is inevitable because there's so much money out there. Okay, no sovereign is ever going to leave so much money on the table and walk away. Okay, at the end of the day, why is it that whether it's a dollar, whether it's gold, whether it's oil, whether it's precious commodities, there is a certain sovereign interest in that. Because let's not forget that sovereign is also there to make money.
This is
With the
exactly
power
what
that the
governments
sovereign
are
has.
afraid of. I think so.
That's what I'm saying. So therefore, if the sovereign finds that there is somebody who's making tons load of more money, they find themselves out of the game. They're not going to allow it. And remember, they have the power. Elon Musk, for all his tweets, has only power over Tesla. Okay, or maybe Signal now. Okay, nothing more. So I think this sovereign involvement in crypto is going to happen sooner rather than later. The second thing is, like all things nonsensical, in India, we start with the absurdity, saying that we're going to ban crypto. Okay. And then some Mandarin will somewhere realize that, okay, no, it's not possible. You can't ban it. So let's embrace it. And then we will come with our own,
Yeah,
Bharat crypto.
and we'll
Okay.
tax it also.
Yeah, we'll come with the Bharat crypto, and then we'll charge 18% on that. Okay. So I think this is the path that we followed over the years. Okay. We are not going to lose touch with a glorious history. Ban it. Okay. Embrace it. Create your own version and tax the hell out of it.
Yeah. No, what interests me is that each and every time we create these extreme positions. Either it's like, okay, I want to get rid of it, I want to ban it. It is never such thing. Okay, let's sit across the table. Let us try to figure out what this technology is. Or and each and every time glorifying blockchain as opposed to Bitcoin, as if these two things are not intrinsic. They're actually intrinsic. They're actually one.
Absolutely.
They are
I mean,
linked.
so
They are linked.
I
Absolutely.
yeah, I find that segregation very odd, kind of stuff from a technology point of view, and even from it. Anyway, these things. I mean, I don't think this controversy is going to die in any hurry. Let's move on to
But
the second.
sorry, I just want to kind of play a little devil's advocate to one point that Subbu made, and just partially. I think one aspect, while I totally agree with what you're saying, I think the fact that the size of the community, the number of people that believe in something, in a sense, has its own power, right? And while we're talking of one bloke in this context, that Elon Musk and his follower base, my sense is that if a handful of well-known celebrities, a Cristiano Ronaldo somewhere or whatever, people in various fields, if they all start believing in it, then suddenly the value tends to kind of get infused with reality. There's a part of the size of the community. Just hypothetically, if Ratan Tata were to say, okay, I believe in it and I'm going to bid $1 billion on Bitcoin, for a lot of people, that kind of becomes now far more real. So I'm saying there is partially in this era of social media, sharing, the fact that if more people believe in something, then in a sense, its reality is larger. And I think that aspect is something that also is a new dynamic in place as opposed to just the sovereign guarantees in the past or the intrinsic value of companies or oil or any other traded commodity. Here
No,
it's also a shared belief.
So I agree
think,
with you, Lloyd.
yeah, I think because
I
that's what
agree with
Subbu was
you.
saying.
Yeah, the more the value goes up, the higher is the degree of sovereign greed.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So if Ratan Tata tomorrow endorses Bitcoin and say, I'm going to put $1 billion down, the next Monday, the government of India is going to announce its own, Bharat crypto.
Absolutely.
So I think these are linked. The more people believe, the greed will increase and the sovereign will come in.
Correct.
The only danger is that you'll have multiple. So you'll have a US crypto, you have a Russian crypto, a Turkish crypto, a North Korean crypto, and an Indian crypto.
Yeah, but you never
And
know.
opening up the possibility of a crypto exchange, therefore. I'm saying,
Exactly.
therefore, that's where, yes.
Yeah, and the government might create something like a UPI kind of stuff, because we had
Correct.
mobile wallet. You had so many mobile wallets. We used to get confused. Okay, whether we should use this. Then the whole question of interoperability came in. We
Yes.
managed to succeed it. Okay, today it is seamless, and yeah, fine, things are working out. Let's hope.
Just one last thing, Leslie. The downside of this, and I don't want to be arrested or anything, but the downside of this is you are now going to move from conventional, forms of offense
Mhm.
to bio offense, and now to crypto terrorism. Crypto will then become a current, because see, it is now under the table, it's under the radar, right?
Yeah.
It is, and that is what is scary. Even if sovereign comes, there will be private exchanges that will keep working, and that could become a tool for these extrajudicial, extra governmental forces to actually create a network.
Indeed.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll have to look at all this. I think currently we'll just give the government the benefit of doubt that whatever it is trying to do, it is doing to protect the investor interests. We'll leave it at that for now. Let's get on to the second part of this discussion. We are going to talk about a safer internet day. Of course, we have a lot of crime, cyber crime, and we have spoken about this in the previous episodes. We have even spoken about cyber war to some extent. But having said that, I think here what is interesting is that the government is talking about creating its own internet with the root servers, and I think the investment of 10 crore. A kind of a, I get the sense that this is a kind of a intranet kind of stuff that we are trying to create out here. I'm not too sure. IPv6. Yes, we require domain addresses, but I I'm a little I'm reserving my opinions on this that till I see the specs and understand it a little more.
So, Leslie, are we going to discuss moving from one observatory to another? I mean,
This is
give me
what
a break. Really, I mean, okay, so you want to create your own internet. Fantastic start. And are you going to create it in 10 crores?
I
Are
didn't
you kidding
understand
me?
that.
I mean, this is so there is something called, stupid. There's something called absurd. There's something called fantastic.
Mhm.
This is bordering on fantastic. I don't know who's thought of it. Honestly, I would like to meet the Mandarin who's thought of it. But the fact is that, it is like saying that, I don't know whether when you were kids, we used to play with this bat and the ball, right? And the kid who had the bat, if he got out, he would walk home with the bat. Okay. And he would say, my bat, I'm not going to play. This is like that. I mean, are we creating something which already exists? Billions of people are out there. Instead of making that a safe place, instead of making sure that that is taken care of, my fundamental governmental duties of law enforcement, protection, enforcement of rules, okay? I mean, our IT Act is fairly strong,
Very,
okay?
very strong.
So instead of doing that, we are getting into the new, bandwagon of saying that, okay, let's create our own internet.
Yeah,
You
let's
know,
control it.
let's control it. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to move a billion people from where they are to your, Bharat Internet, Bharat Net services or something like that. I mean, it's like I said. I mean, it's just absurd, really
Yeah,
absurd.
this is more the China model. Like it doesn't seem to be an India model.
Yeah, but China also has the same internet. It's just that they put controls on it.
Sure. Sure.
That's all.
So my thought on this, Leslie and Subbu, is slightly varied. I mean, aside from whatever
Yeah,
this
sure.
angle is, I think the larger issue that has to become center stage on safer internet is not so much issues around hoaxes, frauds, scams. Right? That's a reality, and that's really about tightening security and putting that's basically making it a case. I think the bigger issue that needs a little kind of discussion is really kind of bringing civility back into into
Exactly.
internet conversations. The whole issue of hate speech, of discrimination. I think these
Lord,
are issues that are being ignored, and
that is
how
the third part.
that become critical to the discussion.
So that we're going to get it in the third part of the discussion, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
We'll
but then this
discuss
is
it.
the genesis, right? I mean, when
Yeah.
you say
I-
Safe Internet Day, I mean, it is like, Women's Safety Week. It means nothing. All that it means is that the blokes who are whistling at the women will stop for a week, hopefully. Okay? They don't.
But no long-term.
Exactly. These are gimmicks. These are just gimmicks. I think what they are really missing the point is that if you want to make internet safe, then it is your responsibility, okay, to enforce the rules. It is our responsibility to be civil and not shoot off the mouth and make sure that if there so one of the things that I found is we keep talking about intolerance, we keep talking about hate speech. How many of us have actually called it out in our WhatsApp groups?
Absolutely.
Right? That is the key issue. As long as the citizens don't take responsibility for themselves, okay, what are you going to create? I mean, BharatNet, Bharat Internet is probably going to have multilingual hate speech.
Correct.
That is all that's going to happen.
Yeah, so I would say, Subbu, it's like two phases. The first phase, and let's say we've lived through 20 years of it, was really like the internet highway, which is the safety and how to prevent accidents, prevent frauds and hoaxes, which is an ongoing process. And regulatory will have to keeping an eye on it across the world, not just in the context of India. I think the second phase, given the wide scale pervasiveness of this, say 500 million or 450 million people in India on WhatsApp, and the amount of hate speech, the amount of random unfounded stuff that gets forwarded, is how does one kind of put in conventions in place or kind of make the whole driving experience more seamless in a manner, again using the highway analogy. How does make that more safe? For example, if in our group someone is spreading obvious hate or someone is spreading falsehood, how does one call him out? Or is there a way of building security? And one of the thoughts I've always had, and love to share it here, is that maybe just like today, every mobile phone user has to provide some security, right? So I provide an address authentication, an Aadhaar card, or whatever. So technically, it can be traced to me when I originate one. There's nothing that prevents me from creating a fake Twitter account and then spreading the rumor saying, "Hey, there's a riot happening in my building, or there's a communal clash, guys. I need help. Everyone from my community come over. I need help." This can go, haywire. So in a sense, sooner than later, I believe that every owner of a social media handle needs to be identified as an individual. Of course,
Exactly.
that comes with its big brother issues. But I just believe that it's too dangerous a tool to go ungoverned, and I can impersonate anyone. I mean, I can say I'm Leslie today, and I can call out some kind of stuff. And before the real Leslie stands up and says that's not me, I could have spread enough of hate or enough of misinformation. So I think authentication to people's social media or responsibility of ownership is real. You may still want to go by a pseudonym, but at least every account needs to be traced back with the government's big brother attitude notwithstanding. So I just thought, and I wonder what you guys have to say to that.
No, I think I agree with you partly. The issue is also that, see, information technology is something which is, ubiquitous. At the same time, it is traceable. Okay. I think what we have to do, like we have done in other crimes, we have to make an example. We have to have rapid and stringent, repercussions that have to be faced by these guys. Make 2 or 3 examples, and then at least some part of the population will stop. See, a lot of people today don't even know that forwarding a hate mail is a crime.
Yeah.
Right? So you have the people who don't know, then you have the people who know but don't care, and then you have the people who know, who care, and who do it deliberately.
But Subbu, probably also, I think from a philosophical point of view, because much of this actually is a philosophical debate, much of it
Yes.
is also a religious debate, much of it is a social debate. So the point is, like, you and me, the way we look at a hate speech, how do you define a hate speech? What exactly constitutes what is hate speech for you? For the fanatic, it may not be hate speech. It may
No,
be a
but the law
religious
is very
kind of
clear. See, the
No,
law
no.
is very clear. The law is very clear in terms of defining what is a hate speech, what is incendiary. So I'm saying
No,
strictly
I'm
apply
saying
the
exactly.
law.
Yeah. So now, so this brings us to the third topic, exactly what, because we have already segued into that. So when we are talking about this whole thing about Twitter, the Twitter Indian government's pat, even if you apply it to all the social media sites, I think one is, of course, whether we have freedom of speech, but of course with reasonable restrictions. What are those reasonable restrictions? I think we all, the Supreme Court of India, the
Absolutely,
laws,
has enunciated
what's
that.
in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely. The second part of it, which we have to look at, is the double speak. Social media sites showing a different line in EU countries, which is what time and again the Indian government has got to see.
Yes.
If you follow a different law in a different country, why is it that in my country you're not following my laws? Because you have to understand that the laws of the land have to be followed. Because these guys, like, I think Facebook doesn't even have a server in India, if I'm not
No, they
mistaken.
don't.
Yeah. The third part is politicians and social media sites themselves are no paragon of virtue when it comes to hate speech. So this, this is the third aspect that I see. So none of them, all of them have broken rules at different points in time, and I find it very funny and odd that a Mark Zuckerberg, or for that matter of fact, even a Jack Dorsey, talk about ethics and code of conduct and all that. Many of them have broken it over a period of time. It's all documented out there.
See, I think
So,
let's leave the politician out. Let's leave the politician out because they do double speak across the board.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's leave the politician out. I don't think it's an issue of politician. I think it's an issue of what is the administration of this country doing to rein in these guys, these companies who don't want to follow a consistent principle.
yeah.
Show your teeth. That's all I'm saying. Show your teeth and tell them that, look, this is not working.
Sure.
Okay, period. You cannot have endless arguments, endless discussion. Look, the law is very clear. Supreme Court of India has very clearly defined what is legal, what is free speech, what are the qualifications, what are reasonable restrictions. Enough precedents are there. Okay. And I don't think Twitter or Facebook or anybody else I mean, they have enough lawyers who are extremely
Yeah.
bright,
Absolutely.
right? So this is not rocket science. Okay, for them to first say, okay, we are banning some handles, suspending some handles, the same evening, reopening those handles,
Exactly.
and then after 1 week saying that okay, 50% of those handles are going to get banned. I mean, this is
That's
nonsense.
meaningless.
And very arbitrary,
Absolutely.
and on what basis is it being done?
Yeah, so I think at one level, and I agree with the proposition, Leslie, is that they have to follow a uniform policy. But two is we have also recognized that they are fundamentally commercial organizations, and they
Yes.
will do what works for their commercial interests. And no matter whatever the personal integrity standards of a Jack or a Mark Zuckerberg, I think as commercials they will always, in a sense, want to align with the government of the day, in a manner of speaking, across the world. Right, and therefore it begets the need of whether there can be a kind of independent, ombudsman or an independent arbitrator, because self-regulation will always be fraught with compromise. Right, at one level you're expecting permissions for the government, and you're seeking favors in a manner of speaking, and at the other level you're going to tell the government, sorry, I'm not going to ban handles, you want banned. I was wondering whether, therefore, there is a case for an independent, like a kind of a court within the internet space to look at all
Is it
these, just given the
practical?
size of how large these mediums are.
No,
No,
it's a
so
very good idea, but is it practical? I'm asking.
it is
Because
practical,
the
and
point of view-
I'll
No. I
I'll
mean, look at our courts, the way they're burdened now. If you want to take up any case with any court at this point in time, it will be a 20-year case out here.
so don't
Now,
be
imagine
the
doing
case.
it.
I think what Lloyd is suggesting is that let's say if I'm Twitter and I'm operating in so many countries in the world, and if I were Twitter, then I know that there are top 4 or 5 countries where I need to focus on because there are issues there.
Sure.
What prevents me from creating an independent ombudsman panel for that country, which comprises legal experts, which comprises sociologists, because that is very, very critical. Okay. And it cuts across a strata of society, which then advises. See, if Mark Zuckerberg can do that in the United States for Facebook,
Right.
why can't they do it for India? Why can't Twitter do it for India? Why can't Twitter do it for Europe? And that is not a big problem to solve. The issue is that the reason why I reckon they will not do it is this independent body may actually come and tell them things which are inimical to their commercial interests.
Absolutely. And that's what even Lloyd also pointed out, because these
Sure.
guys are
And-
business, period.
Sure.
They are in business.
Yeah.
Okay, they are in business, and to that extent, and whilst I'm one of those fairly vocal critics of the government in generally, but there are situations where I seem to believe that we are not doing enough from the government side. We should actually tell them that this or else, like we should have told Facebook this or else. Okay, I think there is some amount of wariness there, which is there amongst the administration. And like I said, the political leadership will always be, will never be able to take a stand.
Yeah.
Because it's political leadership.
Yeah.
All right. They have to, balance between money and funds and votes. Okay. Let's not go there. But what about the bureaucracy? The bureaucracy is very smart in this country.
Yes.
Some of the smartest guys are there in bureaucracy, right? I think if they are just empowered and told that, okay, now go for it, solve this problem. I'm not saying throw them out, but solve this problem. I think we'll get a solution.
So I've got one thought, which in a sense links the second issue, Leslie, to this current issue. And this is blue sky thinking. What if, let's say, the 3 largest, culprits, so to speak, say a Facebook, a Twitter, or a WhatsApp, for that matter, these 3 guys, if every account holder has to provide some proof of documentation. Now, there's one interesting data point. I'm told that in the mid 70s, the number of hoax calls that went to airports of a potential bombing were immensely more. And a lot of these were made from public call offices, PCOs, because it's not traceable.
Correct.
Right now, every mobile phone or every call is traceable. And apparently, last year, the total number of hoax calls received was 7, single digit 7.
Oh.
Right. And apparently, in the 80s, this number was something like about 150 or 200 a month. Right. So people suddenly got scared. Now, I'm just saying one step further, every WhatsApp account, every Twitter account, and every Facebook account needs to have some identity authentication. Right. So if I identify, so therefore I'm known that I'm a hate speech spreader, I'm a XYZ politician, at least now it's identified to me. So there are a lot of the amplification happens from third-party random. So the so-called troll armies belong to a bunch of faceless, anonymous people. And anonymity gives people the right to, in a manner, the right to abuse.
Exactly.
Right? I
Absolutely.
can
Yeah,
go and take a
and it's
spot
more,
on Mr. Bachchan,
more
which I would never do
cowardice.
in the real civil world. If I see Mr. Bachchan on the street, I wouldn't go and call him abusive. But on Twitter, what does it take for me to call Mr. Bachchan a
Yeah,
womanizer, for example?
absolutely.
So my
No,
point is,
that-
identification, people tend to protect their identity, no matter how bad a man is. There's a little bit of a personal angle to it. When I'm anonymous, I can abuse who I want to when I want to.
Yeah. Remove the cloak of anonymity. I agree with that. Remove the cloak. And again, I go back to the same thing. Remove the cloak of anonymity and make examples.
Absolutely.
Make examples. If you find that there's somebody who's caused irreparable harm, okay, see, forget about the fact that the courts are going to take a long time. Okay, that's a reality. But at least charge him, file a charge sheet, file an FIR, get an arrest warrant, let him go get a bail. I mean, since the courts are burdened, it's going to be equally difficult for him to get a bail also.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying instead of going after harmless comedians, assuming that they were going to say something like this Faruqi,
Faruqi.
okay, go after guys who actually said something,
Absolutely.
okay, who have committed a crime.
Correct.
Don't imagine a crime, okay? But this will only happen, and this is where the politician's role comes in. The politician will have to either step back and give the control to the administration. Okay, most of the bureaucrats that I've spoken to, most of the cops I've spoken to, they are saying they make all the right noises.
Mhm.
But the problem is that they say, look, I mean, how much can we do,
That's true.
right?
There
And
is
the
a
administration,
limit.
and like I said, if you can arrest a girl or two girls for putting out a post on Facebook and keep them inside the jail, and it took a law student to file a Supreme Court case and get that 66A repealed.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
it was a law student who did that, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm saying it is easily possible for us to put the entire weight of law enforcement.
Yes.
Make examples. Okay, is it going to stop? It will not stop, but at least one category of people will start thinking. That middle class, they will get scared.
So I think we are all, in some way connected to the media, including Lloyd also, and Lloyd also has been on so many fora. I think we all have gone through these issues at some point in time. We have, laid threadbare kind of many of these issues. We know the solutions. It's not that the governments don't know the solution, but as you said, these are like business concerns. These are going to be the pulls and pushes, but we have to keep on pushing. They have to keep on pulling. So let's, for now, I like to rest that topic for now.
I just want to make one point to Lloyd. Lloyd, you mentioned Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter. In all this controversy, the government of Google has got away.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I don't think he wanted to ignite, just that the
the more. But you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And also it's a reflection of the age of the three of us. But I can tell you, if there was a younger batch, Instagram is another very the elephant in the room that we all older folks ignore.
Yeah, but that trio is all the Facebook guys, na?
Correct.
Trio is the Facebook guys.
Ownership.
All said that, yeah. So
Yes.
and then of course, luckily the TikToks and all are out for now at least.
For now.
So there's less chaos. Of course, I think we have Coup.
We have coup, and this is going to be a coup because nobody knows what coup is going to do. Okay, and the problem with coup is
coup and a lot of these, in a sense, they're kind of passing kind of motion. Everybody helps them to prove a point, and before you know it, they're forgotten. It's like when TikTok went off, there was a whole bunch of people who came in. A lot of them are kind of struggling. Now there are about 7 or 8. And I think it's everyone's, initial nationalistic urge. And then it goes. It's like, I was told I know a mobile phone seller who said like for a fortnight after the ban, the Oppos, the OnePluses, the Xiaomis, they had a bit of a dip. Now it's exactly what the market shares were in the middle of 2020. So things really haven't changed. For that brief moment in time.
So Lloyd, if you remember, I don't know. I mean, I think Leslie, all of us are the same age. There used to be a Hollywood movie which came a long time back in the 70s and 80s called the China Syndrome.
Oh yes.
It is so reminiscent now. It is the China Syndrome now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everything that we do is
Absolutely.
China focused, and we say no. We will not do. We will not focus on China, but everything that we do is focused on China.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
it's a practical thing. I mean, if you're going to buy an electric switch today, you tell a person, okay, go and buy an anchor. Or basically, it's ये 10 रुपए में मिलता है. This is about 50 rupees. What do you want to buy? The guy goes for the 10 bucks. He doesn't look at it whether it's made in China. He knows that
Absolutely.
it's breakable. He knows that it's saying, okay, let me just get my work fixed. But anyway, I think these quick fixes will continue, but we'll have to have those pulls and pressures. Lloyd, coming to you, I wouldn't like to, close this session without picking your brains, as I promised you. On You have been investing in a lot of companies, especially deep tech companies and consumer companies. And given your background with HP and with PepsiCo, it's a very rich kind of background. And of course, you're also involved in media. What are you looking at when you're looking at investors? What exactly, as an investor, when you're investing in these companies? Uh, what are you seeing? What are the kind of broad trends, a couple of trends that you can tell us, and the kind of mistakes probably these guys are making, or the good points that these guys are doing?
So I think two aspects that I kind of focus on, Dusty, whenever I make an investment. I think one is I insist and try and spend time and physical time, wherever possible with the promoters. I think to my mind, 80% of a lot of investments, or a large chunk, 80% maybe just a number I pulled out, is when the founder chemistry doesn't work well, or the founder per se has his track record is questionable. So I think for me, that is, let's say one of the key areas, even more than which sector. It's the quality of the promoter or the founder, the guy who's going to build the next big thing as he starts with. So I think that's one. The second thing I typically do is, and maybe it's an old consumer background, is insist on trying to understand who are his end consumers. I mean, every founder will tell you that the sun won't rise without my product. But until you get a handful of consumers that to some extent echo that sentiment, that really means nothing. So I think these are the two primary kind of yardsticks I look at. In terms of sectors and businesses, for me, clearly it's this whole scalability, businesses that can scale, something as a service model that works. One area that I'm, right now, and possibly with a lot of my marketing background looking at is the whole area of digital fraud. Right, my first impulse was to focus on digital marketing fraud. Just to give you a sense, in the years I spent in marketing in PepsiCo and Motorola, our big spend was 90% of the money went on television and print. That was the big chunk. And everything else was a small add-on, right? Cinema and outdoor and radio and digital, of course, was barely existing. Today, for most companies, the first installment, the first big chunk is digital, 50, 60%. Yeah. If you look at, let's say, the biggest media property that went in the last 3 months, IPL, the big brands were all brands created in the last 10 years. The Dream 11s, the Creds, all new age brands. Now, with that, a lot of companies are using digital media agencies, right? So let's say in the past, if I wanted an upmarket educated clientele, I would pick an Economic Times or pick a Wall Street Journal or whatever. Today, I go to my digital media agency and they go through what is called a media exchange. Now, the media exchange looks at that demographic, looks at male 40 to 55, about monthly income of say 10 lakhs, whatever, and says, hey, why do I need to spend money in the Wall Street Journal or Economic Times? This guy is also a great guy on, say, English Premier League. Or worse, he possibly serves porn at night. I can serve it to him there. Now, as a brand, that's a brand safety, brand concern. And today, as a marketer, I have no control. So my sense is digital fraud in general, not just advertising, but the extent of impersonation, or the fact that brands are so perverse. In the real world, if I see somebody impersonating my brand, I will have the police on his case, I have a case. In the digital world, it's happening all the while. And it's happening mainstream. Big banks, don't turn an eyelid. So I would say some of that's just some preliminary thoughts, Leslie.
Yeah. In fact, Lloyd, it's interesting you should say that, because many years ago we were working with a brand, and so this guy comes to us and says, "I need 50,000 followers on Facebook." And then one of my kids, turned around and said, "I can get him 50,000 followers for 25,000 bucks from Andheri. Will you accept it?" So this guy said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, I'm getting you 50,000. Then what are you going to do with it? What is it that you want to do with those 50,000? I mean, you want 50,000 is a number, or 50,000 appropriate is a number?" There are agencies today, there are shops in Delhi and Bombay and Calcutta who are going to give you the likes and the followers, whatever you want, whatever amplification you want, they'll give you. Okay. The problem that the brands have to solve is that how much does the digital marketer know himself to be able to drive that brand towards his target market? See, the fundamentals don't change.
Absolutely.
Okay, fundamentals of marketing don't change. Fundamentals of publishing don't change. All that has changed is the medium.
Correct.
And there, I completely agree. Digital fraud is probably going to be the next big thing. In fact, I would like to invest in a company which is, well, not doing digital fraud, but trying to figure out.
Absolutely. Also, because Subbu, what you're saying is real, because a lot of these new age companies, say a year or two down the line, which today have evaluations of say 20, $30 million or whatever, a fair amount of funding. Their idea of spreading the word is getting a couple of young, fresh graduates, digital marketers, and they go out and say, okay, give me views, give me likes, give me, whatever.
Exactly.
And those guys do exactly what you're saying. It's a large commodity market. So you get likes from Turkey or whatever is the cheapest format. I was told in the last Lok Sabha in 2019, a lot of candidates, a lot of parties had a threshold that if you want to apply for a ticket from my party, you better have 10,000 followers. So people are actually just in the market for doing this kind of stuff. But more importantly, internet age founders today actually ask their marketing guy, what are the likes, what are the views I got, which have no relevance to their business, but that's become the show-off metric. And it's full of frauds. And, I think it's a big space. I totally agree.
But honestly, we're talking about digital frauds. That's fine, but we had a bigger scam out in the offline media with the whole TRP scam. So we all knew about how the set-top boxes were rigged, and I think both of you, since you all are veterans in that field and you all have tracked it more closely than me, you all know that this was not it was an ongoing issue. It just that it came to light. Somebody highlighted it, so it started becoming. It was presented as a new issue. It was not true.
I'm just happy that it came out. It came out. See, everybody knew this elephant was there in the room. Everybody knew that this was going on. But it was inconvenient for anybody to call it out.
Yes.
Okay. It is just that we found one person who was so, disliked universally. Okay, in the press. Okay, there was a universal dislike.
Absolutely, across political ideologies.
Yeah, he was that way he was very consistent. Okay, so and that he became the coat on which the hanger on which we're going to hang the coat. But has it been not happening for the last 10 years? We all know it has been happening. So
yes. Yeah, but the only solution there, and my point is, Leslie, we'll have to learn to live with it, is that when media has weaned themselves away from just advertisers' money. I know the New York Times has kind of successfully done it after a long time, but as long as you're dependent on advertisers, there is an incentive for a media owner to manipulate the results. It happens in the print IRS. Again, not widely talked about, but all the big players have their extent of some manipulation. It happens on television. So anytime the measurement is critical because your advertising money depends on it, it's likely to be manipulated.
Yeah. You wrote an interesting piece, Lloyd, that consumers are at the heart of the digital transformation. Now, I think we clearly all believe that is the case. But, I find it a little, kind of a self-contradictory statement. Because here, on the one hand, when we talk about digital, most people mistake it for, the deep technology, confuse it with the technology without keeping an eye on the consumer. So when you're looking at these companies that you are investing in and the whole universe, both even Subbu and all have been entrepreneurs, we have all seen these kind of trends. Are you seeing a kind of at least a shift in this whole balancing act? Like, okay, now people are talking less about technology and saying, okay, what are the problems that we solve? Because everybody keeps on pointing out that technology has to solve business problems. It's not an end in itself. Yes, we know that, but is it really happening?
I think the process has begun, trying to base business success on real problem solutions, on real insights. I think that process has begun. The initial surge was a lot saying that technology can do it all. I think now marrying a real problem to a solution, building it on real insight is real. What is not happening, and possibly will take maybe a decade or more, is this kind of skewed valuations. The fact that a moment a person begins to solve one small solution in one sector, you assume that this can overnight magnify into a million X. And I think that is something that, until a lot more people burn their fingers, that reality won't come. So there's a vast belief in what is the potential this can disrupt the world. For me, example, a little, if I look at, let's say, what credit results were, right? Fantastic company. I think what they're solving for is powerful. The fact that a lot of credit card transactions are passing to them is powerful. But then looking at what seasoned investors believe in what they can do in 2-3 years, sometimes startles, because everyone expects them to have an Amazon kind of hockey stick. And I think that is something that has to wait and watch, specifically in a financial sector where sooner than later you're going to expect to compete in a global market. It's not going to be an India credit card only scenario. So I think that aspect of a lot of investors' bets is a little warning. So it's the same set of speculators that at one time were active in the market who kind of find this, the startup ecosystem in a sense, 1000x far more rewarding than a market which is more in the 10x range. And that speculation shift has kind of happened. And that is a bit of a concern in the startup ecosystem.
Subbu, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it is the romanticism of a Facebook valuation in those kind of stories, which really spur the imagination of most of the entrepreneurs. Having said that, I think the VCs are right today, that the current crop of VCs that I see are a lot more hardened souls. They probably know that technology for the heck of it is not going to cut it. But see, you do have some outliers. Okay, you do have some outliers which suddenly come up, and they become the talk of the town, and then somebody decides to put $100 million in it, and then the spreadsheet effect takes over. Okay, and the spreadsheet. So when we talk about valuation, it is essentially the spreadsheet effect. Okay, because nobody is even if the company is valued at $3 billion or $5 billion, it's meaningless because nobody is going to cut a check of $5 billion.
Yeah.
Right. I think this trend is not going to go away. Today, I mean, there will always be the romanticism of the valuation. There will always be somebody who will say, okay, let me chase the 1000x, okay, and let me not, play safe and play in the debt market. So there will be these kind of guys. But I think by and large, see, there's one shift that has happened already, which is that people no longer fund PowerPoints. Okay, they don't even fund prototypes.
Yeah.
Like I like what Lloyd said, that if you are saying that my customers believe that sun won't rise without my product, show me a few customers. Now that is an important statement to hear, which means as a VC, as an investor, he's saying, I believe you, but I want to believe in your product, right? Which means you have to have a product.
Yeah.
Even if it is version 1, that doesn't matter. Yeah, you have to have a product. So PowerPoint days are over, prototype days are over. Now the product has to be there. You have to demonstrate. Okay. Now after that, can you wish away the romanticism? No, I don't think so.
No, but
The
I think
youngster
even on the romanticism, I think one point that you also have pointed out earlier, and many others also have pointed out, that many of these buyouts that have happened, the acquisitions that have happened, they're basically it's cash and stock options.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like people get carried away by the end number and they don't realize it.
Facebook is a very classic example. $19 billion that they paid for WhatsApp. It's $4 billion cash.
Exactly.
$15 billion swap. Okay, so the cash component is for that, and that's why I said the spreadsheet takes over. Okay, and then you say that okay, it's a $19 billion deal. Well, it is a $19 billion deal. Nobody's questioning it. It's a $4 billion cash deal.
They have to be clear. I think because that romanticism part of it can be stemmed if people really understand the difference. I think they need to spend some time understanding.
There, I would put the charge completely at the doorstep of the journalists.
Yeah,
I mean,
that is true.
No journalist ever pointed that out. We had to read the fine print and figure it out. See, a lot of these stories get created and spread by our own brothers and sisters.
True.
Yeah.
And 80% of them don't even understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
Which is what I call lazy journalism. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when somebody says, this company is now worth $100 billion, I mean, okay, it's $100 billion on what basis?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think those are questions that the editor must ask. And these stories are primarily coming from journalists only.
Sure.
And they get picked up by WhatsAppers and it gets spread around, but the origin is the journalist.
But an interesting trend aligned to what you've been saying, Subbu, and is interesting, is that in a sense, the early stage money pickings today have become relatively easier. Just to give you a small example, an angel network I'm part of, they talked about this interesting phenomena, saying in Bangalore in the 90s, the first set of dollar millionaires were the Infosys dollar millionaires, people who made
Right.
money when Infosys went public. The last set of dollar millionaires in Bangalore, particularly, were a lot of kids in their 20s and 30s who cashed out when Walmart physically bought
Yeah.
Flipkart.
Flipkart.
Now, these are kids, and just I'm losing a loose metaphor here, in their late 20s, early 30s, who in a sense overnight got, let's say, 5 to 7 crores in their bank. Now, they're unlikely, unlike the Infosys dollar millionaires of the 90s, to go back and open a fixed deposit. In fact, they're even unlikely to even look at a mutual fund, right? They're
Absolutely.
saying that, okay, I've got now 3 crores to play, right? So I'm going to put 10 lakhs in every. Now, I was part of an angel network that I obviously won't name, where the average retired CXO, etc., was thinking innumerable times before making a 5 lakh or a ticket 10 lakh investment. 2 months, 2 due diligence calls, meeting promoters, folks like me. And these kids were signing in a half-hour pitch. They were saying, okay, 5 lakh dal diya. And that was startling. Now, what happens is they're bridging the gap between these, the loose PowerPoint, as you said, and somebody now getting onto a trajectory saying, okay, now I can hit that 50 crore revenue. And that's when the big, the Sequoias of the world can jump in. So that ecosystem, to my mind, is, in a sense, the pipeline is thick, it's robust, but it's not heavy on due diligence, right? For a young person, you don't think twice, right? I made 3 crores out of a well-cashed deal.
Easy money.
Easy money. And they're willing to invest. So that is fueling, in a sense, good way. It's fueling entrepreneurship. But it's also not well thought through. And maybe I'm just speaking from a perspective of an older person, but that's the big, the fresh elephant in the room. And that's something VCs have, yet to come to terms with.
But Lloyd, the interesting thing is, for everything that happens, there are, elements that are good, elements that are bad.
Mhm.
When I said PowerPoint is not getting funded, I realize the fact that 99% of the PowerPoints may not have been worth funding, but there will always be that 1% PowerPoint, okay, the entrepreneur who's got this great idea, okay, and he's got this great concept, he's got everything in his head, which is fundable.
Yes.
Now, when you stop funding PowerPoints, you stop funding that also.
Yes.
Now, these kids, the latter day millionaires who are coming, are maybe perhaps helping fund those outliers, that 1%.
Yes.
They may be understanding it better. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I think to that extent, it's a good risk that they are taking.
Yes.
Like any other risk reward system, yes, there will be a 90-10, 95-5, win loss or loss win ratio.
Sure.
And they're willing to live with it because there's like you said, 3 crores is the money to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't know, we always say that, given our age group, I don't know how many of us would have, invested in an Instagram initially. I mean, we would have not even thought, and probably not even bought into the idea kind of stuff. They want people putting photographs, so there are plenty of things.
Absolutely.
So, but you
So
still
therefore,
have an
younger people,
Instagram. Yeah.
so Leslie, younger people coming into the startup ecosystem as investors is a positive thing. I'm totally for it.
Very positive.
Their risk appetite is larger, and their fear of failure is much less. So
Yes,
a lot of the
exactly.
lot of the early stage promoters I work with, their issues. I can switch back from my so-called Beamer back to my bike, right, with no loss of face, right? Which an older promoter obviously has got family and has got too many kind of pillars to kind of bow to. They're more nimble in that way, right? Completely concede that. That's a very positive step.
I should give you an anecdote. So I was interviewing this kid, a couple of months back, and this was the Zoom interview.
Mhm.
So very, very full of beans, and that kid, and he said that I just my business didn't do well, so I'm shutting it down because of COVID. I'm looking for an job. So I asked him. I said, so what is it? What's about you? Okay. He was so proud. His chest puffed. He said, "I'm a serial failure."
Very
That
interesting.
pride. Okay.
Mhm.
In my time, if I were a failure, I probably wouldn't have got married. Okay. I mean, it's only after marriage my wife figured that I'm a failure. So to that extent, I was lucky, But These days, these guys carry it on their arm. I mean, they actually believe that it's a good thing,
Yes.
and that's a very, very healthy
So,
trend.
so what would be what would be the expression now? Earlier, used to say he has a chip on his shoulder. What would you say he's carrying on his shoulder today? So, viewers, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We had a discussion on these four topics. One, of course, the who let the dogs out. The dog coin issue, then the safer internet day, where we segued into the whole social media responsibility versus governments, and then of course we picked Lloyd's brain on the whole startup community, the investor, how VCs look at companies, and the more interesting part is, I think, the consistent messaging that is here, that we require young people, especially our young viewers who are watching us. We require you very much to create the next Instagram or the next TikTok or whatever it be
Or fail creating it.
or fail creating it.
Yes. Yes. Well
And
said.
and please look at the Atmanirbhar campaigns of India and try to create something in India which is not a closed loop kind of thing, but which gives you the power of the internet kind of
Which
thing.
is cool and not just cool.
Absolutely. Lloyd, once again, thank you very much for your time and for your insights. Subbu, thank you as usual.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you very
Lloyd.
much, Leslie. Wonderful
Yeah,
being here.
thank you.
Thank you, Subbu. Wonderful,
you.
wonderful
Thank you.
chatting.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.